is a really significant thing for St. John's, this 10-year re-accreditation visit. Not just because of the re-accreditation, that's mainly what I'm going to talk about, but because of how we get in it and what it signifies. And to kind of put this in a little bit of perspective for you before I get going, just to make sure that you know what these initials are. ISAS stands for the Independent School Association of the Southwest. And it's Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It has 89 member schools. So it's a pretty exclusive group when you think about that range and the number of schools that are in it. The Southwest Association of Episcopal Schools, which is what SAES stands for, has 112 member schools. Now, there is not necessarily overlap between those two. There is some overlap, but not really that much, because many of the schools that are in SAES are very small schools. And you might get a lot of schools in there that are, pre-K and Ks and things like that, very tiny places. For instance, I think Austin has about 12 schools that are SAES schools, and you look at them, it's all these little, maybe go through about first grade or so kind of places. So what I want to talk to you about today is why this is a really meaningful process and event in the history of the school if it's done right. The process, and then more important, why it matters, but then also, most importantly, how we did. And as one employee's child put it afterwards, it simply came down to, for that child, did we pass the test? And it was really that simple. And the answer is, we did. And we did with flying colors. And to put that in really simple terms for you right now, we came out with 8 summary commendations and 4 summary recommendations. Now, a couple things about that. 8 is a pretty typical number for these to get in terms of your commendations. To only receive 4 summary recommendations is extremely unusual. It's very unusual. And the other thing that you'll see as we go through this is the level that they were on. Okay? They weren't certain little ticking things. And I'll talk more about that as we go through this. Now, naturally, when you go through this as a school, it can be a pretty stressful time. You do this once every 10 years. You spend a year preparing, and then 14 people from other schools come and spend 3 days with you. And then they tell you what's wrong with you. So it's stressful. We're supposed to figure it all out. Now, I was never in the slightest bit worried about this. I really wasn't. As a matter of fact, I sent this tweet out 6 days before they were coming. Okay? I had no concerns whatsoever. Now, there's a little commercial interruption there too. I'm trying to build my follower base. Pick it up and so forth and so on. All right, now first, let's talk a little bit about the idea of accreditation. Okay? We belong to the National Association of Independent Schools. ISAS is a subset of that. All right, now I bring that up because the National Association of Independent Schools, at least in my mind, these are the finest schools in the country. Okay? This is the same association for which you have, schools that you have always heard about, the Exeters, the Sidwell Friends, places like that. Okay? So it's pretty high standards to get in there. And they have what they call their Commission on Accreditation. And what they do is they take all of these regional accrediting things and put them under one umbrella to make sure that there's some consistency. So they oversee all of these regions and they make sure that each association is looking at the highest possible standards and then the best possible practices for this accreditation process. Now, if you were to go to their website and read about it, there is tons of verbiage there. Okay? You can go ahead and look at it if you want, NAIS.org, and do a little search for Commission on Accreditation. And I'll come back to this a bit at the end. But for now, there's really three things that I want to stress about accreditation for you. The first one is that the real measure is institutional integrity. Okay? What they're trying to do ultimately is to see, do you live up to your mission? Do you fulfill your mission? Are you true to it? Now that's very important because in these associations, there are all kinds of different schools. So they come in and they look at it in a very particular fashion about the culture, the mission, the philosophy of that school. The second thing is, it allows us to measure ourselves to our peer independent schools. Okay, I mentioned some of those national schools. Locally, some of the other ISAS schools are places like St. Mark's, Hockaday, ESD, Greenhill, Good Shepherd, Lake Hill, Ursuline, okay, and Lamplighter. So you can see how we measure up against them. Now that's very important because many of our students go there, and we can have the confidence that young people leave St. John's poised to thrive. Okay? That we are preparing them for what they are going to need. And much of this presentation will capture why. Now, to make this easier for you, we've organized the feedback into 5 categories. The things that we receive from them are incredibly dense, and they're incredibly lofty. And if I were to just sit here and read them to you, you'd be kind of like, huh? Because that's how the faculty heard it. The guy who chairs it comes in and reads them the accommodations and reads them the recommendations, and they didn't know how we did it, other than it sounded good. Okay, so we kind of organized it for you. Now I'm going to pull out keywords and phrases that'll be up there, and then I'll read you slightly abridged versions of what they said. We also organized in this way because the recommendations and accommodations are they're intertwined. And you have to kind of see how they play off of each other. And I'll explain and unpack them a bit. And you need to know, we're still reflecting on these a lot. We have not figured out exactly how to respond to some of these yet. Now, I mentioned that they are at a very, very high level. Okay? That tells you a couple things. The first one is the fact that they focused on such high-level things means that what they saw happening on the ground, they were completely satisfied with. They thought, wow, what happens here on a daily basis, the way this place operates is sound, it's good, it's strong. So we can look at these larger kinds of issues. Now, that's very different than you often see in reports. It's also very different than the report that St. John's received 10 years ago, which were things like, you need to fix your kennel net, get a new bus. And so they were very operational and basic in those ways. Now, this is all we have from the report right now, are these summary things. We will get the full report a few months from now. And that's where they will give us some finer details, like, here are some suggestions for your Planning George program. Here are some suggestions for this and that. But right now, they're all very, very high level. So the first category has to do with the self-study, okay, which they cited as a quality self-study. And I'll add to that, we also have to turn in something called the documentation of adherence to standards. Now, I want to let you see what these things look like. This is the self-study. It's about 260 pages with, I'm not sure how many chapters in the whole thing. This is what we turned in just to show our business processes and how we do things. This is our documentation of adherence to standards. And we had to talk about how we follow legal practices, financial practices, administrative practices, all sorts of different things. Then, lined up along that wall in the back, not today, when the visiting team was here, was a table full of addenda. different other documents that they would want to see. Okay, so tons and tons of things for them to see. I'm very happy to say that we came up clean on documentation of adherence to standards. That doesn't happen very often. Now, I challenged people when we started this process about a year and a half ago on how we were going to do this, was to produce a very, very strong, honest self-study, and that we were going to do it in a different way, in that it was going to be total involvement. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So some of the things that they said about our self-study. They said the school has approached the self-study and accreditation visit with a concerted sense of purpose, commitment, and meaningful reflection, commended for its organization, its readiness, the transparency during this visit, and for its eagerness to grow into the highest possible fulfillment of its mission. They also said the thoroughness, attention to detail, and overall quality of thought and response found in the self-study were to be commended. Now, I mentioned how we did this differently. And part of the reason that we did this differently is at my previous school, I led the self-study. And we did it in the same sort of way where we involved everybody. And before that, it was traditional that a very small group or even one person was responsible for the self-study. And when we did it last time at my previous school, SAES took a look at it and said, that's how we want it done. That's the method that we want. So we farmed it out where everybody was on at least 2 committees when they were employees. Some of you were involved on committees. We had board members on committees. Many of you filled out the survey that was part of it. So it was very, very comprehensive. I also serve on the standards committee for SAES, and I'm on the full board for SAES. So I know that not all of the schools take this study nearly as seriously as we do. They kind of see it as something that they have to get through. And you don't get the same level of honesty the whole way through. That's why, when this came back, there was nothing there that surprised us. Nothing that we didn't on some level already know. Nothing that we hadn't already said to the group, this is something we need some help on because we want to do better. So it really signals our commitment to improve. Now before I go to the next category on the self-study, a little aside, I'm going to embarrass her to death. Chris Patterson did the most amazing job, along with Catherine Potter, running us through this thing, and particularly getting the self-study together. So she deserves some credit. So the second category has to do with people. And here are some of the words that we heard about the people here. And to quote from the commendations, that it is a school populated with engaged and joyful learners, dedicated and enthusiastic faculty and staff, committed trustees and parents. The students comport themselves with great confidence and with an affirming commitment to their school. They also said that it is a hardworking and talented group of educators, clearly respectful of the past, mindful of the present, and committed to the future of St. John's. Now, to me, in some ways, this is the most important one in here. Because really, education in so many ways is a relationships business when you boil it right down to it. None of the other stuff works unless you get the right relationships in place. And actually, I wrote a blog about that a few weeks ago when I realized that I paid my tuition dollars for my kids. And it was who they spend their time with. It was the people they were sitting with in the classroom, the teachers and the other kids, it was the other families there. It was the trust I had in people leading the school. And one of the beauties about St. John's as a school is it is such a communal place. It is a place where everybody contributes so much to what the kids get out of here. And you know, one of the things about this place is you can say we don't have this or we don't have that, but there's one thing that happens here for sure when your kids go to school here. They get known, they get nurtured, and they get loved. And they come out of the other end having felt that. And you really can't ask for much more than that. The other thing that I would add to what they said in here about the talented and hardworking group of educators is these teachers are incredibly growth-oriented here. They are always seeking ways to improve. And because of that, they're great role models as people and as lifelong learners. They have a real zest for life and for what they do. I mean, you just can't beat that. So then programs and processes. We talked about having excellent programs. They said St. John's has an overall excellent academic program that prepares students well for high school, college, and as lifelong learners. This is where it begins. These first decade of their life. This is where it starts with how they're going to do later. And, high schools want our kids. I hear it from heads all the time at the other schools. We love getting your kids, or how can we get more of your kids? Several schools have our entire 8th grade go over to visit them. They send admission people down here to talk to our 8th graders to do their sales pitch. They want them. When alumni speak to 8th graders, they tell them, don't worry, you're prepared, we're ready. Last year, the valedictorian at ESD was the St. John's alum. So they are ready. The second thing, they talked about the meaningful technology in the classroom. And the key word here is meaningful. It's not technology for technology's sake. And what I mean by that, I've been at certain schools that are laptop schools, for instance. And they call themselves a laptop schools, but the laptops might as well have been glorified notebooks. It really didn't make any difference in terms of the educational experience. Here we really try to integrate it meaningfully, such as what we're doing with our Imagine iPad program, and why we're slowly, intentionally working towards that, because we're asking ourselves really important questions about how we want to use that to maximize the learning that occurs. And there's really 3 keys in my mind to this idea of meaningful, that you're giving them the best tools that you can. You're empowering them with them. It's active and engaged learning, and the degree of individualization that it allows to occur. The growth of the chapel program. They said the changes to the chapel program and the development of religious studies have enhanced the program. That's crucial for who we are as a school. You look at our mission statement, and it finishes in a Christian environment. We want those values floating through every part of the school. In how we live, in how we treat each other, in how we help students see a higher purpose, all of that. It's part of that holistic development of quality people. And part of the reason that's so important is, as my wife is very fond of saying, you can make straight A's and flunk life. Now, in these programs and processes, they also gave us some clear places where they believe we can grow. The first one has to do with diversity. Now, it's not a matter of numbers. And this is where these recommendations start to get really dense. So listen carefully. And this is the abridged version, keep in mind. Recognizing the multiple facets of the concept of diversity, curricular, pedagogical, racial and ethnic, religious, gender, socioeconomic, etc. St. John should define diversity as it pertains to the identity of the school and its own Episcopal character. Establish the means by which diversity can be embraced and actuated in a manner that is both in keeping with the mission of the school and with the St. John's Episcopal School graduate being community and globally conscious. And so really what that's saying, I think, is that it's not just about numbers. Okay? That's the usual way that schools will measure whether or not they've done what they should do when it comes to diversity. But it has really to do with reframing the question and rethinking our approach. And to ask ourselves, what do we really want to gain from diversity? Is it global awareness? Is it interaction with others? How are we going to reframe it and rethink it, establish our objectives there, and then to rethink the means and to look at alternative means and look at different ways of tackling a very, very difficult problem. Now, when we're talking about fundamental aspects, here are just a few examples of that. And the recommendation, part of the recommendation read, the growth of the school has created a need for increased commitment to systems and coordination, planning and procurement, common language, and curricular alignment. Significant progress has been made in these areas over the past several years. Further growth and development would enhance the operations of the school. We've done quite a bit in this area already. To give you some examples, and this is what they're referring to when they say about significant progress having been made. We now have, on those Wednesday afternoons when your kids leave early, we now have a set pattern of meetings that take place to make sure that certain things are getting addressed. That wasn't necessarily in place before. We also have people who, I keep wanting to use the word departments because I'm so used to it, but the idea of vertical teams, okay, subject areas. We have now appointed clear people who are the chairs in those areas to make sure that things are happening there. We have completely revised and updated the employee handbook to make sure that all of that is where it needs to be. We have done a much better job of articulating what our curriculum is. We now can go and find out what are the main points at each level in each subject area. We have put new employee evaluation systems in place. So all of this has gone on, but there's still a lot of tightening that we need to do. There's still a lot of cleaning up that we need to do, and we know that. One example of that would be, okay, so now we've articulated the curriculum, so now let's start looking at common language in here. Are we referring to things the same way? We're getting it going on a vertical level. Can we do it better on a horizontal level and bring more together? The two things that are going to help with some of this is, particularly when they talked about planning and procurement, one of the main areas they talked about there was technology. Two things that will help us tremendously with that is this move to the iPads, because it's helping us figure out, okay, how exactly are we going to do this so it's straightening up those systems for us. And then about a week and a half ago, we had somebody from Educators Collaborative come in and do a very thorough technology audit for us. So we're taking a very hard look at all of that, particularly our office systems. So that's going to help us tremendously in that area. And then as I have been doing preliminary interviews with candidates for the new head of the middle school, one of the primary things I've been talking to them about is, okay, what's your vision for exemplary middle school education, and tell me how the use of time plays into that. Because our middle school schedule is very, very hectic. It's jam-packed and it's hectic, and that's what they're talking about there. We're not talking about the whole calendar for the year and that sort of thing. So then we start to get into the idea of leadership and what they call trusted leadership. And the first thing is, they said the school and the church are to be commended for their continued efforts to collaborate and communicate. Leadership is committed to engaging in important and meaningful conversations that will advance the interests of the St. John's community. We are so proud that we are the oldest Episcopal school in Dallas. A lot of people don't realize that, but we are. And we're also extremely proud of the fact that we were founded as a mission of St. John's Episcopal Church. That means so much to us. It has so much to do with the atmosphere within the school. And how much I value the working relationship that I have with Father Howard. The way that And then they talked about school leadership, and they said, school leadership, trustees, head of school, the administrative team is to be commended for its capable and careful stewardship. The key word there being stewardship. When I went to New Head School a few years ago, one of my mentors there probably told us 150 times in the course of the week, take the long view. Take the long view. That's kind of like, for the first couple months, I was like, oh, I'm not trying to understand tomorrow. But now I understand what she was saying, and really so much of it is about creating the right culture and things to keep the school progressing long term. And the same sort of thing for trustees. Really, if you think about what that word means, what their job is, okay? Their job is to hold the school in trust and to set it up for that long-term success. And part of what all three of those groups have to do is keep thinking in terms of growth and progress, but also preserving the core, preserving what is the essence of the place. Now, we have a wonderful, wonderful board. And one of the things that they've been doing the last few years in particular is becoming more strategic rather than operational. And part of the reason they've been able to do that is because of how capable the administrative team is, and that they're taking care of things. And this change was praised in another commendation, that the deliberate and long-range improvements to governance, including enhanced trustee recruitment, orientation and mentoring, a reduction in the number of committees, and an advanced focus on advancement will serve the school well in the years to come. But leadership also has a clear challenge, which is the idea of financial sustainability. This may be the densest one yet. So. Financial sustainability of a tuition-driven school is increasingly difficult. Trustees and administration are fully aware of the need for enhanced capacity for endowment income and for a capital campaign to accomplish the campus master plan and to reduce debt. The committee notes the positive degree of communication between the church and the school, particularly between its leadership bodies. The committee recommends a continuation of the important and strategic conversations that should occur between the church and the school, particularly the extent to which school leadership can implement its ambitious plans for the future of the school within the existing bylaw structures of the church and school or through alternative models. Okay, so there's a lot in there. So let me try to pull out the main things. First, when they say maintain financial sustainability, and you see things up there like endowment, master plan debt, okay, the school is in strong financial position. Okay, that's not the issue here. And I would very much encourage you that later this year when there is a presentation, board presentation on the business of St. John's that you attend, that you can really get a good picture of the finances here, how they work, and what kind of strong position we are in. This is a giant issue at many, many schools. Because, look, I'll be perfectly honest about it. Independent schools struck when they could. Okay? In the 90s, in particular, as the economy was booming, tuition went and here it happened a little bit later. But schools also started building all kinds of things. Pat Bassett, the president of the National Association of Schools, referred to it as the nuclear arms building race in independent schools. And now schools are trying to figure out, how are we going to pay for all this? How are we going to, because we know we can't just keep raising tuition. It doesn't work that way. So part of this is looking at alternative revenue streams, and not just endowment, but other things that you can possibly do, because this is a challenge, but the simple reality is people and things cost money, and particularly things that people want out of schools now, they cost money. So it's a challenge for us. This requires really, really heavy lifting on the part of trustees. If you go back to what I just said about what their role is, the long-term interests of the school, this is their primary gig right here. And so part of the question that we have to ask ourselves, do we have the right governance structure in place? We have great people. Is it the right structure for us moving forward? So we look at other models, we look at how other schools do it, so forth and so on. Now that is very, very heavily tied to the next category, which has to do with identity. And they talked about us having a strong heritage. So the Episcopal identity is well articulated and valued by the students, faculty, and staff, and parents. And I mentioned earlier about the end of our mission statement, our relationship with the church, how proud we are of that. And I also read this one earlier about educators respectful of the past, mindful of the present, committed to the future of St. John's. Now, that also leads to a challenge within the area of identity. The recommendation reads, numerous changes in St. John's Episcopal School over the past decade, significant tuition increases, enhancements to the physical plan, changes in leadership and faculty, resulted in increased strength for the school, but the changes may have been unsettling for the community. Conducting essential conversations involving all constituencies that define and articulate the core identity of St. John's Episcopal School, what the school is at present, and what it aspires to be for the future. Once the shared vision is articulated, the path for the future can be charted, allocating resources to programs and personnel to pursue the best possible fulfillment of the St. John's vision. Plan well to strategically utilize its treasure of time, talent, and financial resources. And so they talked about tuition, enhancements to physical plan, changes in leadership and faculty. I would add to that demographic shifts. I would add to that expectations for the school. And all of it requires a lot of reflection, conversation, thinking about, and making some determination about some things. Think about it from this angle. I'm starting my third year here. So I've been part of this community for about 2¼ years now. Before that, the school had a long-term head suddenly resign in, I believe it was April. And then an interim, and then somebody else comes in. All in the space of about 16 or 17 months. That's unsettling. That's hard. And then you throw these other changes kind of on top of that. Now, some of this is a philosophical thing too. They're kind of saying, what do you really want to be as a school? Because one of the things that they heard from here were different ideas about that. And it's a hard, you can't really quantify it, but it's out there. And I hear it. I hear from certain people, this is what I think St. John's is, and this is what I think St. John's should be. And then I hear the exact opposite from other people. Now, in some ways, this is also a very practical question. I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like 90% of our students come from 2 zip codes. That is one of the wonderful qualities of St. John's, in that we are a neighborhood school and we have such a neighborhood feel. The reality is, being a neighborhood school like that also imposes certain limitations in terms of what kind of admission pool you may have, what kind of advancement work you may be able to do. The school has talked at different times about wanting to get endowment up to a certain amount. Very difficult when you're a neighborhood school. So we have to kind of figure some things out in that regard for ourselves. Because, you know, in some ways, we kind of want to have it all. And we just may not be able to. And we have to make some choices in that regard, is what they're telling us. Now, all of this is part of the natural evolution of an institution and of a school. And it doesn't concern me that much because I really believe we know in our hearts who we are. This is a school that is amazingly true to its mission, its picture of the graduate, its 5 tenets of Episcopal education. So in that sense, I'm really not concerned, but it is going to take tons of conversation and reflection and articulation. But you put all this together, and this is an amazingly glowing report. So many people at this place have contributed to their report. It's not just the faculty and staff, though they're a giant part of it. It's not just the school leadership. It's each of you sitting at this table. It's the fact that you chose to come out here this morning and hear why this is important. And that kind of thing happens at St. John's all the time. So we have plenty of reasons to be proud. Those are basically the 8 commendations right there. Quality self-study, excellent academic program, hard-working, talented people, fiscal identity, trusted leadership, meaningful technology, church-school collaboration, improved governance. Pretty good. It's the things you really need. But clearly we have some work ahead of us. And that's one of the nice things about going through this process and doing it the right way, is it helps you focus. It helps identify for you what's important. Define our core identity. Figure out diversity here. Continue to grow and improve in certain areas. Financial sustainability. But in the meantime, I want to come back to that NIS word on re-accreditation, and I want to pull out 2 clauses for you. If you leave with nothing else today, these are the 2 things that I want you to remember about accreditation and what this process means. The first one is it means that the school that gets this meets or exceeds standards and criteria of institutional quality. And I would underline exceeds when it comes to St. John's. And secondly, there is evidence that it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. So, we're feeling pretty happy about ourselves these days.